Okay, I see it. It says join us live now. I see that. Cool. All right, it just popped up on my telephone too. So now if I click on that, you're saying I share this somehow? Caleb?
He just ran upstairs. But you can at the very, very top there's an option to share it directly to there is usually one. It's just a link though. I think that's probably
I can hear myself in the delayed reaction talking. Charlie, you can still hear me?
yes.
And you said at the top there's an option to share?
Audio is not up.
And action.
Go.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our very first online Book of the Month Club. Our book this month is They Called Us Enemy. It's our selection for August of the year 2020. It is co-written by George Takei, Justin Eisinger, Stephen Scott, and it features art by Harmony Becker. I am one of your hosts today, Curtis Sullivan. I'm a co-founder of Vault of Midnight. I'm also a very old kid who likes Conan the Barbarian. And as you can see behind me, I really, really like skulls, probably too much. I am joined by my co-hosts, Charlie Tucker, who is the general manager of Vault of Midnight. And what else, Charlie, can you tell us about you?
Yeah, I've been at Vault of Midnight for 8 years. I love cosplay, I love anime, I love manga, and all sorts of stuff.
Right on. We're also joined today by Amanda Reyes-Aquino, who is the general manager of Vault of Midnight Detroit. Amanda is a LARP god and is a big fan of making bread, as I understand it. Amanda?
Yeah, I do really love baking bread. Swords and bread. Like, you can't go wrong with those two things. You'll survive forever.
Rock and roll. That's excellent. Hey, our book today, as I mentioned, is thanks for joining me, everyone. And Caleb is our behind the scenes. We should say Caleb Wimbrough is our behind the scenes producer slash inspiration slash tech guru, getting us online and keeping us running. So, yeah, like I mentioned, our book of the month is They Called Us Enemy. This is co-written by George Takei. He is well known as a TV and movie star. He is Sulu from Star Trek, the TV series, and tons of movies. Like, I feel like 10 different Star Trek movies. I might be making that up, but there's lots of them. This book is really about his life story. It's a graphic memoir. In the 1940s, 1941, George Takei and his family were interned in a camp, multiple camps actually, as they moved around the country after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor in World War II. This is a true story, and this recounts his time in the camp and his memories as a young boy, and what he experienced there. So this is his first graphic novel. He's written a bunch of books as well, without pictures, which I don't understand. I only read books with pictures, so I'm glad he's finally done a graphic novel with the help of a bunch of talented people. So, yeah, let's talk about who worked on this book. George Takei was born in 1937. He is an actor and a book writer. He also is an outspoken LGBTQA plus activist. And They Call Us Enemy is his first graphic novel. This is co-written by Justin Eisinger, who has worked for a comic book company called IDW for many, many years. They're a really well-known comic company. They've been around for probably 15 years. They produce lots of licensed stuff, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Transformers and all kinds of fun stuff. They're also responsible for publishing March, which is a really, really great graphic memoir about the civil rights movement and John Lewis specifically. That's also a great book worth checking out. Another co-writer on the book is Stephen Scott, and he is a longtime comic book writer and editor and has worked across the industry for Heavy Metal Magazine, Archie Comics, and also a very tiny comic company called Marvel Comics. You've probably never heard of them. Harmony Becker, the artist on this book, is well known for her webtoons comics and her online work. This is her first physical published comic book. She is from a multicultural family and has spent time living in South Korea and Japan. Her work often deals with the themes of language barriers and how it shapes people and their relationships. One of her webtoons comics, Himawari Share, is going to be published by First Second Books in 2021. It's available on Webtoons now, and I read the first couple chapters this morning, and it was a blast. I highly recommend it. So, that's the book we're going to talk about. They Called Us Enemy. Those are the folks who made it. We're going to just do an open discussion, you guys. I got some questions that we've cooked up, and we'll ask some questions. We'll share our thoughts on them, and please sound off in the comments section on YouTube any questions or comments that you'd like us to get into. You guys ready to jump right into this? Anything I missed before we jump right into an open discussion about this book?
No, I think
I'm
you
ready.
got everything.
Yeah.
Exciting. All right. Let's start us off here with, as a teenager, Takei became curious about the internment camps but couldn't find information about this in the history books. What is our experiences learning about the Japanese internment camps during our lives?
I know that I did learn about them. I didn't learn a ton about them. It was definitely more like, hey, our country did make this mistake. This is what happened. And then let's move on to everything else in World War II. So I had an overarching idea of what occurred, but not any sort of detail on it.
And you remember this was something that was actually discussed in class? I mean, sounds like briefly, but this was something that came up in school?
Yeah, I'm definitely familiar with it. I've taken a fair amount of history classes, though. It was always my favorite subject, so that might be part of why I have learned more about it.
Got it.
Yeah, I definitely remember in whether it be world history, U.S. history classes talking about it. But yeah, it was always just really a very rushed experience. And to me, reflecting on it and thinking about it, and even there are moments in the book where as a teenager himself, George Takei is frustrated because he can't find anything in books or anything about the events that had happened in his own life. And to me, even for myself reflecting on that, it really makes a big impact on how much that really lessens the experience of all these people that had gone through this. And I can only imagine the frustrations that they felt. And in terms of that too, there's something that in the beginning of the book, it starts out with him he had been talking about this at a TED Talk, and it was sort of him the book is set up by him sort of talking to the audience or the reader about his experience, and he talks about the internment of these people, and then stops and then says it's what it is forced incarceration. And that was never put to us when we were learning anything about this. It's always just the internment camps and the Japanese. Even in the book they talk about the relocation camps is what they call them, when realistically it was imprisonment, it was incarceration, and it was forced. And I think even the way that history likes to spin those words and use words to sort of lessen the experience of what happened to these people and how unjustified it was. I mean, it's a lot.
For sure. Yeah, I wasn't the best student, so that might have something to do with it, but I don't remember ever hearing about this in school, not even as a footnote, and becoming aware of it through movies and things that I saw completely by accident. So yeah, as somebody who didn't experience it directly, I can only imagine somebody who had gone through these events and then finding it this that part of history has been almost erased. And when you do find anything, it's like you say, Charlie, it's kind of been, the words have been changed to kind of soften what actually was taking place. What else here? We've got my next question. What did you know about the Japanese American incarceration during World War II before reading this book? What new information or details did you learn? What questions might you still have? I guess I'll start. For me, I think the scale of it was truly staggering to learn that over 120,000 American citizens, and we should say that really plainly, American citizens, were rounded up and forced out of their homes, stripped of all their belongings and their personal possessions except for what they could carry, and removed forcibly from their properties. So homes they owned, businesses they owned. Um, I even after learning of this, over the last decade or so, I had no idea that the scale was so large and the effect so massive. So that was a pretty stunning revelation for me reading this book.
Yeah.
I think like the book offers like an inside perspective, which like it covers details that I never would have thought of. But yeah, like I never really realized that those people lost everything: their businesses, their homes, their possessions. Um, that's wild that the U.S. government would essentially take all of that away from them solely based on their ethnicity and country of origin.
Yeah, that was definitely one of the more surprising, or not surprising, but we talk a lot about them being removed and for how long they spent there, but like everything leading up to it too, it almost felt like almost like calculated. They were like freezing bank accounts of certain Japanese, like like suspected like activity, even if you had just traveled outside of the United States, or just things like that, where like these were just normal things that any person might do, but like it was all, like I said, it was all very calculated. They were taking steps, they were making it hard for people to conduct business or do different things, and like they were talking about you know farmers and stuff having their farms closed down, and at that point, like anything you left behind, your farm equipment, your homes, whatever, it was all just seized by the government. They sold it and actually profited off of it, and it effectively just erases the lives and past of these people who had come to America and worked so hard to like build what they had. So that was like something that really struck with me, because I don't know about like all the events happening even beforehand too, and how big of an impact, not just spending as many years as they did in those camps, but also like how much of it was taken away even before that. So
yeah. No, it's a hard pill to swallow, because in so many ways, but like second and third generation Americans, and we just can't say that enough. Like American citizens, second and third generation, this is what's happening to them. So yeah, it's pretty staggering, the disregard for. I mean, like the founding documents, even, right? Like the Constitution of the country. It just doesn't seem like. It seems pretty illegal. I mean, it's immoral to be sure, but yeah, it's a lot. Takei has told his story of his time in the internment camps in different forms over the years. What do you think about his decision to share his story as an illustrated graphic memoir? He's done TED Talks. He's done lots of interviews. He's spoken at various events. So his story's pretty well known before it came to comic books. But yeah, what do you guys think of the graphic novel treatment?
Charlie, you want to answer this one first?
I think stories like this, and really any story, I mean, for me personally, I always love the fact that sort of having the visuals to see kind of the expression of like emotion on people's faces in such a time that was so emotional is like very important to me. I know I'd read some articles a while back on how a lot of parents were worried that like teaching graphic novels and stuff to students would be less impactful than say reading a novel, because they're not using their imagination as much. But for me, like, it's almost like the opposite. I feel like it really helps kids to be able to see, like, you can truly see like the look on how people felt, what was going on. And there were moments that were like really heartbreaking to see, like their mom having to, you could see it truly in her face, like what she was experiencing. But there were also like really happy moments too. There was one part where after everything, George Takei is on an audition for Star Trek, and he's talking to the director of the show, who's explaining that like, hey, this is not your average role. Like you want a strong represented Asian character. And you just see in that one panel like his face just light up, And like the fact that like something that, you know, is like that one thing was so meaningful for him, and you could just see it in the illustrations. I loved it. It was really great.
Agreed. Yeah, that was a very cool moment. Yeah. Yeah. For me, I think graphic novels and comic books in general really manipulate time in a way that I find really, really compelling. You know, you can pause a movie or you can pause a book, but the fact that the images are still and they're kind of moving when you read them, and you can slow down time or stop time, you can rewind in a way that's just different from other mediums. It just allows me to digest, especially like nonfiction in graphic novels. For me, it lets me digest in a just a totally different way. I can pause. I can reread stuff for effect. I can like that panel you were talking about, Charlie. I could just like really, really, you like stay there for a minute and control how long I you know, like how long you linger on moments. And I think for nonfiction, I love it in comics. Period, it's one of my favorite things about graphic storytelling. But yeah, for nonfiction stuff, I think it really for me is excellent. So yeah, make everything a graphic novel.
Yeah, I thought this was particularly cool in that the art style of this book that Harmony Becker draws with it really combines like American style comics with Japanese manga. You see like the little kids when George and his brother are like excited about something, they've got stars in their eyes, kind of like a manga does. But it also, and it's black and white like a manga, but it also has like a very Americanized feel, and I thought that was cool in that this is a story about Japanese American struggles and stuff that has happened to them, and I thought that was a really interesting way to present it.
Great.
There's also some cool
Next up,
moments
hey,
too, like
question, you guys.
I was gonna say there were some cool moments in there, like diagrams and stuff of like you could see like the way that their cabins were set up, or like the way that the mess halls and stuff were set up. That like, you know, it's so easy to get like a picture of what it was like actually living there, you know, and even down to small details like the little rugs and stuff that their mom was like weaving out of spare fabric and things like that. Like, I think is super impactful in graphic novels.
Yeah, it's you can fold in those kind of moments in a way narratively where it really works, where it might be harder to do in a different medium, and it's really seamless and really, yeah, paints a bigger picture. Yeah, that's a great point. All right, you guys, this next question is a big one, and it's tough. We could go on and on about this one, but yeah, let's. Here we go. How does Takei's story connect with issues going on in the United States today?
I think this book is particularly relevant right now. There are still huge amounts of immigrants who are being held in refugee prison camps along the U.S. southern border. So we basically have internment camps currently in our country. And on top of that, with the COVID-19 outbreak, our president is inciting racism against Asians and Asian Americans in the way that he's talking about this virus.
Yeah, I felt there was a lot of things, even small things that like while reading it were like very personal to me, and I could definitely connect to things today, like the way that, you know, he was talking about the way that the government was kind of phrasing the terms that they were using towards these people, while maybe not like outrightly saying it, but trying to essentially just like insinuate that like, hey, like Japanese cannot be trusted. They called them enemy aliens, and like it was, like I said, very calculated in the way that they were using words to describe an entire group of people. And today, like, we just see it all the time, and especially within the past couple of years, in terms of like, you know, we have a president trying to build a wall and you know, saying that like people are racist or drug dealers. You know, we're talking about people that are going to protest and calling them thugs. We're talking about a Chinese virus and not like COVID-19. All of these sort of things, like while they are just words, like they carry so much weight and meaning, especially coming from the government. And you know, it was only 4 or 5 months ago when I was reading story after story, day after day, about even Asian Americans and other Asians across the globe that were being targeted, being harassed, being physically assaulted, being denied business entry into businesses and things like that. And like it's, um, and especially here in America, like you know, I would hear stuff all the time, people not wanting to go out to eat at a Chinese restaurant, for example, to where it's like there's not really any connection. These people are in America, they're conducting their business in America, they are American, but like you know, the fear and the ill feelings towards them that I think that have been like sort of calculated and placed there, you know, they trickle down into even like, you know, the smallest forms of prejudice, and we see it every day.
For sure. Yeah, I was struck by like just how much you know, hasn't changed, and like, you know, to both of your points, like all of these things just feel like they're stacking and they're ongoing. You know, I think the national discourse has moved, you know, in a better direction recently, but only because of like, you know, just one horrible event after another. And yeah, we're still talking about you know, football teams named the Redskins, and you know, it's, yeah, I was really struck and saddened by like the similarities to where we find ourselves. I mean, fully 60, 70 years later, we're still having almost the same conversation. So yeah, that was a tough thing to really, I mean, you know that instinctively anyways, just by kind of, you know, living in America today. But you know, just reading it and just reading how starkly similar a lot of the language and rhetoric was, you know, was pretty intense. You know, yeah, like you said, the government was, the way they subtly changed words. That's still, that dog whistling is still happening now, and maybe even more intensely now, maybe even worse now, because we have a commander in chief who is very okay with saying very incendiary, you know, in flat out racist stuff. Yeah. So we haven't seen that in a long time.
There were some moments, I recall in the book when they were talking about, you know, after the bombing of Pearl Harbor and all of this was sort of happening. I mean, things were, it almost seemed like it was like a very quick turn on the government to say, like, you know, they're basically trying to just place bars on all these Japanese people so they can't do anything, and they placed like a curfew so that no Japanese American could go out past like 7 p.m. and they were talking about a lot of people like either leaving their homes and like an act of defiance or whatever, but how these curfews were almost like placed in a way to enable law enforcement and government to be able to arrest these people and to be able to harass them. And I just think like how real that is today even, you know, in terms of like we're having curfews and things to go up in response to protests across the country, and how, you know, who do those curfews really help. And you know, it's there is so many parallels. It's sad but enlightening for sure.
Yeah, agreed. Yep. All right. Hey, next up, we'll go with a slightly lighter question. George Takei recounts his experience from the perspective of a small boy. How does that benefit or take away from the narrative, do you think, for his story in this graphic novel?
I thought it was interesting because Takei was only 5 years old when his family was taken from their home and sent to the internment camps. And I know the only things that I remember from that age are like really good memories, and even then they're like just barely there. So for a 5-year-old to have these memories so like clearly like remembered such clear memories. It means that, like, to me, like, that's either like something that was really traumatic and scary, or it was something that was really good, you know, like those are the only things that you really remember from that age. So even if he didn't understand what was happening around him, his brain was still like, hey, this is a really important moment.
I think it also helped to bring parts of the book that were like the more, I guess, like uplifting parts of the book, in terms of like talking about. It was cool to sort of see a balance of what he thought were almost positive experiences, or like the good memories about it, which I think from an adult perspective you probably wouldn't see, because at such a young age you can't really like fully comprehend this attack basically. So it was nice to sort of see the small things that they would do, and like, you know, him talking about how he almost, you know, when they were on the train rides getting there, like he was excited, like he thought it was, they were going on an adventure, and then they got there and were forced to live in horse stables. But to him it was like a cool thing, like he was like, wow, this is like neat, I've never done this before. And not that that like took away from anybody else's experience, but it was definitely like a different perspective, I think, than what you would see. But I thought it was like really unique to see at the very beginning where he was like, what's happening, to then, you know, even at a young age he himself started to realize like just what was going on, and how affected everyone was by it. So you could really see like that journey from like, you know, not knowing what was going on to like a lot of like enlightenment at a super young age in terms of what was happening.
For sure. Yeah, I like the way they talk about memory a lot in the story, and how you don't always, memory's a tricky thing, and you remember it depending on you know who you are. And like you said, Charlie, his recollections of it being this like grand adventure or exciting or you know, different, and than it really was. And his father and mother's like desire to protect the kids and kind of encourage that version of events, you know, his dad telling him that they're going on a vacation or a trip, or you know, to kind of lessen the blow of what was happening, and then to see those kind of two realities converge, right, as George like gets older, and after they're out of the camps, and him and his father are having those discussions, kind of like filling in the gaps of like his memory with what was actually happening. I think that was really cool.
Yeah.
I mean, narratively, it's really, really amazing, but I think it's that's a tough thing, right? The experience itself, and then finding out like your memories of it are radically different than what actually happened.
When they talk about how George, you know, he felt like when they were leaving, it was like they were leaving their home because they had lived there for so long, and especially at that age, like he's, you know, developing a lot, and he starts to just get comfortable with this way of life for them. And you know, as they leave into the unknown, you know, they had nowhere to go, they couldn't go back to like where they were at before. And you know, yeah, it truly felt like scary because he was leaving everything he was familiar with. But I thought it was cool how, you know, insistent like and helpful his parents were, and the fact that like, you know, they were moving into like sort of like scary neighborhoods or places where they were unsure. They didn't really like the places that they went to after they had left the camps, but it was important to them that, you know, they finally had that ability to like rebuild their lives and take back what they had worked so hard for. And like you kind of start to see that even at a young age, where George starts to realize like he can adjust and find a new life. It's yeah, it was very powerful.
Yeah. It's notable, like, his family didn't leave the internment camps until 1946. So he was there for 5 years of his life, like from 5 to 10. Which, yeah, it's such a long time as a kid to be in that situation.
Yeah, him talking about the guard towers as being like familiar landmarks, and yeah, the barbed wire fences as being like, you know, it's that whole devil thing. But I mean, even for he doesn't even really describe it like that. He describes it as like, I don't know if fondness is the right word, but they had created a life there, and they were scared about the unknown. The unknown's more scary than what you know.
Yeah.
So
They describe
that
like
is a lot.
they describe those fences as sort of like almost protection for them in terms of like it was like a safety thing for them, and got it interesting. Like yeah, you spend that long with kids and families who are in the same situation as you. They look like you, they speak like you, and then he's going out into the real world after that long and having to go to like actual public schools and realizing like there are teachers there. He talks about an experience with a teacher who just had this hatred for this young boy who had gone through all of this, and I can't imagine like having spent years with other kids in the same situation that know exactly the pain that your family is going through, and then just being thrown out into the real world where like people still have don't trust you or whatever. Yeah, I thought that it definitely put a very unique perspective on the story.
Yeah, the malice, like that teacher you speak of, had like just real kind of hatred for George. And like you said, I mean, you've already gone down this incredible path that's just been so traumatic, and then you're essentially right. You're free, right? But you're not free. You're thrown into a place where like, yeah, you're still confronting like actual hatred on a daily basis from your fellow countrymen. Yeah, that's a lot. So you guys, I don't know if we want to take a pause for a hot minute, and I don't know if we got any questions coming in. I don't see any coming in yet. Hey, if anybody's watching this, if anybody's joined us for our first book of the month online event, if you got any questions or comments and would like to jump in and hear some hot takes from not hot takes. We don't do hot takes. We do very, very considered smart responses, right?
Yes.
That's my book anyways. Are you guys doing doing okay? How are you holding up?
Good.
Yeah, I felt like, especially even reading the book though, while it's a heavy topic and educated me a lot, like I think that the writers did a really good job sort of interspersing those kind of like sparks of like humanity and joy, and like not in terms of like, wow, life wasn't so bad, but more so like how amazing these people were to actually deal with these things that were being thrown at them. It was a heavy read, but like also just there was like a lot of moments of like compassion and joy. It was cool to see like things that like things that other people on the outside were doing to help. Even there was like a bookseller who was like driving in and donating books and taking their pets to the vet, or there was also like a lot of amounts of like joy and compassion in this book too, which made it like I think a really good reading experience for sure.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, there was just the community stuff. Every time they would move to a new camp. They would but they'd get settled in and they would figure it out. But then they would form a community, and they talk a lot in the book about how they had friends and neighbors and would do community holidays and movie nights, and just found a way to eke out some sort of a life, and in ways like probably pretty as fulfilling, I guess, as it could be given the circumstances. I mean, you're locked up, you're essentially in prison, but I think that was really, really amazing that people, you can find the strength to kind of like try to create a a place, a community in the middle of all that crap.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really cool. You're right, Charlie. There was lots of moments peppered throughout the book that were really powerful in that way. So here's another big question, you guys. What was the most powerful moment or scene from the book for you? Do you have one? Was there any kind of overarching theme or anything that really, really resonated for you as you read the book?
I really liked reading about how, or I guess, what stood out to me was the mom smuggling in her sewing machine, and then spending a lot of time creating a home in a very unhome-like situation, to the point of like making curtains and finding scraps to make rugs and decorating, and then it's followed up by like she couldn't cook for her family. Like it's something that was taken away from her. She couldn't cook the food that she had always wanted to make for her children, which I think is really, food is a love language, you know, so to take that away from people it's a very strong idea to realize.
Sure. Yeah, the panel where they show the mother unveiling her smuggled prize, you know, like the kids are like crazy excited. They don't know what it's going to be. What's it going to be? And that panel is fantastic because the look on the mother's face, like she's so she knows what she can do with that sewing machine for her family, right? For their quality of life, like, and it brings her immense pleasure. Like that's a really cool panel.
Yeah.
And I love it. Yeah, that was really rad.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite moments, and like I identified with it a lot as like I could think about that is exactly what my own mom would bring. It just made me feel like a lot of love and stuff towards my own mother because as growing up, I mean, it was the same way for us. It's like, you know, she kind of made from the ground up like everything that we had. So it's cool to think like how the one most important thing to this woman to help her family is like just something that she can create for them, which was really, really neat. I also thought it was kind of interesting, some of the stuff between essentially there was a moment in the book where the government says like we'll give everyone a choice to answer this document and essentially like renounce their citizenship for the United States, and it meant like staying in the camp and kind of essentially almost being protected from the outside world that hated you at the time, and they had to answer questions about their loyalty towards the United States and whether or not they would be willing to go to war for the United States, and their parents had answered no to both of those questions because they sort of felt like, why would I risk everything for this country that has taken everything away from me, and like the struggles, and not people were ready to give that up because, you know, people had also like built a love for being an American at that point. You know, they had come to this country and for, you know, the American dream and everything that had been promised to them. And so like the struggles that they were all having internally amongst themselves and sort of like these small acts of defiance as well, were and the fact that, like, you know, they felt like ultimately like they kind of just gave up everything for their family, I thought was really strong.
For sure. Yeah, that was intense to you've been put through all these indignities, and then on top of that, here's this form that, you know, it's just a false question. It's just like so degrading on top of everything else, and so hard. Yeah, that was tough.
And I think
also
something that
related a lot to the dad stuff.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, and a word that he had kept using was like shame, like a shame that they felt about it all, which was like, you know, they were put in a position to feel like guilt over their race and something that they had no control over, And they felt
Yeah.
like as victims themselves, like, which is very common, like they felt a tremendous amount.
Agreed. So next up, we've got
Oh, I think
there's
we
a
have a couple
scene
of comments too.
where George and his father argue about American democracy, and this is after they've left the internment camps. And this is, you know, George is probably I think they say he's 15 or 16 in this moment. And what did you guys think about that conversation? Like, it's pretty powerful stuff. It's George being very upset with what he perceived that his father's like bad decision making or kind of culpability maybe in what happened to them. Yeah, that was tough to see because, you know, the dad's been through a lot. He kind of had to, you know, suffer through all the stuff as well. He's trying to protect the family, and then you have a son who's older now who's really questioning his choices. His father makes this statement: despite all we've experienced, our democracy is still the best in the world because it's a people's democracy. What did you guys think of this moment in the book? Yeah, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it made me really question what it is about the ideals of America that keep people coming back despite the constant wrongdoings. Takei talks about later on in the book, or just before this, I think, about the men and women who signed up for the military while being interned and left their families at the camps and went on to earn the most medals. They were the most decorated soldiers in the entire World War II, and to have fought so hard for our country that, like, not only discarded you but like actively did harm to you. It made me question it. Like, I guess I don't necessarily see where Takei's father is coming from, and it's something that I think I've wanted to think about more, anyways. So.
And I think it's something too that, like, for me, even being able to, for my own like experiences, like, I think that's something that, like, a lot of children who's are like, you know, who are children of like immigrants, you know, having been like born in the United States, but having, you know, your parents had the experience of like, you know, having to come to a new country and like rebuild their lives. There always is that sort of like disconnect, and I feel like that is pretty common in terms of like, you know, I feel the same way sometimes in terms of like, you know, I don't have the same ideals and stuff that my own mom does, and sometimes it's like baffling to me in terms of like someone who I would think that her perspective would be a lot more similar to mine, but, you know, it's always a wake-up call that, like, yeah, you know, she's lived a completely different life, and like having sort of the life experiences of moving to the United States and starting a life here and doing all of that, like, yeah, I always wonder, like, you know, how that changes your perspective on the democracy that we have here.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, it is pretty common for a lot of, you know, children of immigrants to have that kind of disconnect for sure with their parents.
Maybe it's something to do with the fact that, you know, folks born here, that's all they've experienced, and then somebody coming from a different place maybe has just like, they just have, like you said, a different perspective because they've experienced a different version of government or a different version of, you know, democracy or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, that's a great point. Hey, we've got a couple of comments here in the thread, you guys. Caleb, producer extraordinaire, says the most powerful moment for him during the book was the mom's bag of goodies, and how with her limited time to pack, she got candies and treats for the kids to help shelter them Um, and that was really, really cool. There's a scene on the train where they've just been rounded up. They've been forced to move their home. I mean, it's literally like you're at home one day, bang, bang, bang on the door, get your crap and get out, you know, only what you can carry. And there's a scene on the train where the mom busts out a storybook and a couple of like suckers for the kids. And that was a pretty amazing moment because you got the sense in that moment that the kids like didn't know what was going on, and they from this kind of trauma that was like, you know, all around them. Yeah, that was excellent. We've got another comment here that says, I liked watching the older boys prank George and his brother. Even in the middle of all that chaos, there was still like this kids pranking kids moment. And I'll agree with that. Those kids were jerks because they were trying to get the other kids into something. But it felt like some stuff some kids would do.
Yeah, it felt normal.
Mm-hmm. Which is wild. All these normal moments. I think that's another thing this book does really, really well is, yeah, you're locked up. You're in prison, essentially. But these normal, the new normal emerges and you find a way, to kind of, act like you would if you weren't in prison, which is really, really wild.
Yeah.
Hey, here we go. Next question, you guys. In 1988, President Ronald Reagan apologized on behalf of the United States and signed an act granting $20,000 to each of the surviving 60,000 internees. What are your thoughts on this, you guys? Can we place a price on what was done to folks when really the cost is incalculable, right?
Yeah. I did the math, and it essentially what they gave them, like if you account for inflation, is what would have equated to a little over $2,000, which was less than double the median yearly income in 1940, which just doesn't seem like enough. Like they lost businesses and homes and years of hard work and safety, and then they were detained for five years or so. Like it's hard to put a number on that that's big enough.
Right. Yeah, that's part of the broader question of reparations, right? More generally to affected people across, you know, the spectrum of American history, right? This really got my wheels spinning because, America has definitely done some damage to, you know, just off the top of my head, indigenous people, black people, Japanese Americans interned in World War II. I think there should be a real serious conversation about reparations broadly, you know, by folks in power, you know. This really got my just my brain all messed up. There's so many things wrong with this story and so many things that are horrible about this, but the fact that folks were forcibly removed from their homes and lives absolutely destroyed. I mean, obviously possessions are not as important as family in your life and all of that. I don't think it should be. I think all that stuff is really, really important too. I mean, you lost, you know, George's family in particular. They lost their home. They lost their family business that they had spent decades building. They lost their legacy, really, in a way, you know. And I think, that's a big conversation. But I think that one should move to the forefront of a lot of political people's talking points, and more importantly, action points, right?
Yeah. So I think it's important to note, and this is something that comes up in like the conversation of reparations, is that having generations of people behind you who have earned a lot of money or saved a lot of money, and it gets passed down through these generations, and they essentially like took that away for the last like 2 to 3 generations of people, and there's a lot that you have to build up. So them taking something away from, you know, a small family in the 1940s just trickles down into the generations and generations after that.
I think too, something that is sort of spoken to in the end of this is like, in terms of like, you know, to George when he received this. I mean, for him it was like, I don't, you know, what do I really do with this? At that point, his father had already passed away even too, so it's like there's nothing really, you know, his father didn't get to see any sort of form of like reparations or justice for him. And I think the big thing a lot that this book wants to say is like, you know, it's more important too as well that like these stories are told, and they're told as they are. You know, we don't need to hide behind words or actions. Like, you know, teach your children, teach students, teach people about the stuff that's going on. There's no way to really progress forward unless we like look really hard internally at the things that we've done and how they're wrong.
Yeah, that's a really good point, right? Like let's include this in like standard history class curriculum, right? And talk about it as it was, not in with flowery language. Well, hey, you guys, that is our time for this first inaugural book club. I've got one closing question for you guys. It's really recommendations from you all. So, have you read anything else on this topic, or are there any other books that you'd like to recommend that are kind of in the graphic nonfiction category that we can send folks away with?
Yeah, there's actually a graphic novel that just came out this past week. I haven't read it, but it's called Displacement by Kiki Hughes, and it looks really good. It's about a girl from 2020 who gets transported back in time to the 1940s. And then there's also March, which we already mentioned, by John Lewis and Nate Powell. So,
awesome. Charlie?
One of my personal favorite graphic novels that I always recommend to almost everybody is a graphic novel called The Best We Could Do. The artist's name is T. Bui, and I know I'm probably saying that wrong, but it is basically her sort of memoir about, you know, she, at the beginning of the book, she has she's having a baby, and it just sort of fills her with this kind of overwhelming love towards her mother, who had immigrated on a boat with her father from Vietnam during the Vietnam War. And it's basically just about sort of like families growing up at this time and being, what it's like to have parents having immigrated during such a crucial time and rebuilt everything, and sort of like the way that she connected with her parents and the way that she connects with her child now. I think, a lot of people would enjoy it, and it's great. It's one of my favorites.
Awesome. I'll throw a couple onto the list. I really, really liked The Silence of Our Friends, which is another Nate Powell book. This is based on a true story about a white family and a black family kind of coming together in Texas in a very racially charged moment in American history. It's got that great Nate Powell art. Can't recommend it enough. And then another book that's a little more abstract, but it's The Arrival by Sean Tan. And it just, for me, it conveyed the immigrant experience, I think, in a way that I've never seen it done, and was really impactful on me, and really helped kind of illustrate, no pun intended, the feeling of traveling to a totally strange place to make a life in a world that you might not know that much about, or a people or a language that you might not speak. So I think it's a silent comic. There's no words in it, and I just think it's really magical and impactful. So cool. Hey, thanks for joining me on our inaugural online book club. Thanks to Caleb for making it happen and doing all the tech stuff and keeping us on time. Thanks so much, Amanda and Charlie, for bringing all your expertise and care to the structure of the show and all your thoughtful answers to these questions. We're going to try and do a Book of the Month club every single month online. We'll announce our next one as soon as we have it. Obviously, we're in a strange new world, so we'll keep you posted on the next one. Hopefully, it'll be the last Sunday of the month. That's our goal. Next month's Book of the Month will be Hot Comb by Ebony Flowers. This book just won an Eisner Award, which is like the big deal comic book award that happens every single year. This is the description that I grabbed right from the publisher, so bear with me as I attempt to read off the script. Hot Comb offers a poignant glimpse into Black women's lives and is a coming-of-age story seen across a crowded, ammonia-scented hair salon while the ladies gossip and bond over the burn. Revelations about race, class, and the imperfections of identity swirl through Flowers' stories and ads, which are by turns sweet, insightful, and heartbreaking. Flowers began drawing comics while earning her PhD, and her early mastery of sequential storytelling is nothing short of sublime. So yeah, check it out, Hot Comb. It's our graphic novel selection for the month of September. It's 15% off for the whole month. You can get it at any Vault of Midnight. You can get it on our web store, which is vaultofmidnight.shop. So please check it out. And stay tuned to all our social media channels for more announcements of Vault happenings. You can check us out on vaultofmidnight.com, our website. We're on all the places you'll find people hanging out online. Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, all those things. Until next time, I have been Curtis Sullivan. Thanks, Charlie, Amanda, and Caleb. You guys can sign off at that point. I don't know if you guys want to chime in.
Okay.